So I am calling to order the Wilmington School Committee meeting of March 27th. It's officially spring. We made it through the dark side. So our first order of business this evening, if you could all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we have a great room full of kids, which is just what we like to see. And I understand we're getting a nice presentation this evening from our class from the north, and we're going to have Mrs. McMiniman, their principal, introduce them.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. We thought it was a great time to celebrate some of the accomplishments of the students at the North. We have two groups here to present to you tonight. We have some students in the 5th grade presenting on their photography unit, which they did a few weeks back, and we have some wonderful samples of their work and what they learned during the unit. So if I announce their name, they can wave so you can know who they are, and then I'm going to have them come down and sit to present. Sophia Cable, come down and have a seat. Sabrina Fitzgerald, Brendan Ferroni, Gavin Dong, and Ian Brazel. And then following that group, we will have students talk about our recently added Lego Club that meets during indoor recess. And there were sign-ups for this group, so these are the students that chose, instead of going to recess, of coming down to the art room and working with Legos and learning about design and architecture. And these students are Eric Banda, Zuzu Alhadi, Pravya Ramesh, and Maya Mirza, and they'll come down and speak to that. You have a presentation in front of you. I'm going to introduce Miss McNamara. Kathleen McNamara is our art teacher, and she has inspired these young artists and photographers.
Good evening, everybody. I'm very proud and fortunate to work with all of the students here that you see, and I wanted to share some of their work with you. We've been working hard with photography, and as you know, with our new Lego Club. We are grateful for the opportunity to study digital photography at the elementary level. We use Canon PowerShot cameras, and I'd like to talk with you just a few brief points about things that we have been learning, and then of course we'll hear from our artists and photographers too. So one of the key pieces to studying photography at such a young age, we look to our visual elements and our principles of design when we're thinking of photography. And many of the things that we're able to do through the power of digital photography is to capture our understandings of our learned concepts and while we're having some fun. We also too really want to have it be known that it's a tool, and other tools, a means of self-expression, and of course, a way to help document maybe our academic learning as well as our social and emotional experiences. So we have a few things to share with you, and I thought we can hear from students. On the next slide, we can move forward. Thank you. So one of the key pieces that we've talked about is our lighting. Lighting is key. We talked about angles and lighting. And I thought Brendan would like to share a few things with our natural light, controlled light, and artificial light.
Speak nice and loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like natural light, controlled light, and artificial light are different types to light for your photography. Natural light is light from the sun, and like you can use that on like sunny days and stuff. Then artificial is like lighting like light bulbs and stuff. Then controlled is on one object.
That's right. So we do practice, have opportunities to practice all of the basic lighting. And we also talk about composition, and I know Gavin and Ian did a lot of work with that today, particularly with the subject that we photograph, as well as the emphasis, I know, with rule of thirds. And I know that you were saying earlier that was something you'd like to talk about with the rule of thirds and angles. Gavin.
So, rule of thirds is when you don't just put the kind of subject in the middle. You would put it either on the left or the right side in kind of 3 columns that you put it in. And me and Ian took some pictures of each other using bird's eye view, which is from above, and worm's eye view, which is from below, angles. And we kind of used this. You can use this in pictures and some videos too.
I see, Gavin, too, you like to make your own videos, is that
Yeah,
right? Wow, I just learned that. Yeah, that's pretty exciting.
And if Ian wants to add anything.
And I know, too, Ian, I brought some of your photos as well, so we'd like to share these with you as well, if you'd like to pass them around. Great. I know on the next slide, thank you so much, too, we have our portrait photography. So we have our portrait photographers here, Sophia and Sabrina. We really emphasize setting mood, capturing the personality of our students. We have some posed and candid shots, and Sabrina and Sophia work together. You'll see some of the photos that are being passed around, but also here on the screen, the top right, we have Sophia and Sabrina, if you'd like to share some of your thoughts on your photograph.
So when I was taking the photo of Sophia, I tried to make it a candid shot instead of just having her look right at the camera like any old photo that you'll see. And I tried to capture the moment of her daydreaming and dazing off instead of just having her being like a regular student.
And then too, Sabrina and Sophia, the bottom left photo, I believe, wasn't there something there with angles that you were, initially you tried to, made it look like she was running, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I originally planned on that photo to make it look like she was running, but when I took the shot, it just looked more like she was flying. And Sophia, if you want to add anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you caught me doing something that I don't want to show other people, like a magical power or something.
Yeah.
I love that. I love the thinking involved and all the creativity too. On the next slide, I know we were talking a little bit about photography, and we could use photography for so many different reasons, and some of that you see here on the right, the reasons why. I know you would like to speak to some, and I know we have a picture too of Maya here in the back for being artistic and a means of expressing ourselves, but is also a way to even talk about some difficult things and social issues too that some of our students might be experiencing. Did you want to add anything too, Sophia?
Photography, when I was in the photography club, it helped me see things from a different perspective, and it really helps me express myself.
And there was too the bottom left photo there with the leaves in the foreground.
So there's a small ditch in the ground in the schoolyard, and I decided that I would get on the ground, put the camera sort of in the ditch, sort of tilted, and take a picture of it to see it from a different perspective. It looks like worm's eye view, and yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you all very much with photography, and I hope you enjoyed looking at some of those photos. We also included some Andy Goldsworthy and natural objects. So, and we have Lego Club, I believe, next too that we could hear from. Yeah. All right, friends. And have a seat back up here. All right, Lego Club. Thank you so much. That's great. So new this year, we have our builders. We have a lot of builders and budding architects. It's a conversation that we're having this year in art. Thursday and Friday at recess. Initially, it started off as a way to pass winter time, having our indoor recess, but it's actually it built a pretty steady following. So on Thursdays and Fridays, we have our Lego Club. And you can see here on some of the photographs, we have been fortunate to have a couple of Lego sets that represent San Francisco. We have the Paris, which has the Louvre and the Arc de Triomphe, as well as Falling Water. And I know, Eric, you wanted to speak a little bit about your experience in the Lego Club.
So I kind of saw the advertisement, and I kind of wanted to sign up to see how it would turn out. So we went to art room and started building, and I was really surprised how like detailed it got and how detailed Legos could get, and I never realized how detailed they could get, and it's really like fun to like socialize with your friends.
That's great. And Maya, too, you had, what was it, Paris, right? And that's, we've had some really wonderful conversations just prompted through playing with the materials and experiencing building the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. And to Zuzu, right, was that with the Paris? And if you wanted to add anything to your experience?
I liked it because like you can like talk to other people that you haven't met before and like share your like things that you like to do and like kind of talk and then like build, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, talking and building and problem solving too. And our last slide, just to kind of give a sense of some of the things too. These are really wonderful resources too, and gives a great opportunity for conversation. I didn't know if too, Pravya, if you'd like to share anything with your experience before I say thank you.
It was like really fun and creative, and you got to socialize with all the other people, and you got to learn about like architecture and everything.
I think they enjoyed also some of the famous places that they could build.
Right. Yeah, we've done the Golden Gate Bridge. We have a beautiful set for Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. We're still in process with constructing that too. But it's exciting. You know, we get to talk about travel and architecture, so it's a really wonderful conversations too. We just wanted to thank everybody. We appreciate the opportunity to share what we've been working on at the North. And of course, we'd like to thank the Visual Arts Department and the North and West PAC and the Technology Department for having this opportunity to share photography and Lego support the STEAM concepts. So thank you, Bob. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your work with us. I'm sure you're aware we have an art show, a district-wide art show coming up this spring, and I think it might be a great opportunity to showcase some of this work. I saw some beautiful pictures there. So thank you. Is anyone from the committee like to offer any comments or questions? Mrs. Burns.
I have to say, with photography, because I wish I had the opportunity to learn. Digital photography was just coming out when I was graduating college. And I graduated with a degree in photography from Mass Art. And one thing that you need to keep in mind as you're learning all these concepts about photography is what type of emotion your images can create in other people. And that speaks volumes, too. Besides the pride in the work that you're able to produce, it's how you can share it with others. And if it's a happy picture, you can spread that happiness. If it's sad, you know, it has the same emotions, and that's also an important aspect to the arts, especially visual arts. And for the Lego group, I have to say, absolutely impressed with the skill set. Because I know some of these sets are far beyond your age range from what these sets are tagged as. I know that a higher construction, higher age bracket in constructing, and it's incredible how you work together to create these large structures of famous sites. I would, however, like to see in the future, perhaps, someone might be kind enough to donate Fenway Park as a historical and, but I say that whimsically, but I thank you very much, and keep up the good work.
That's great. Children and families, thank you very much for attending our meeting. We love hearing from the kids. Thank you for bringing them in. We always try to put the kids towards the beginning of our meeting because it's not in our intention to have you stay all night unless you really would like to. But we understand that there are things like homework and bedtimes that must be attended to. So thank you for your attendance. We appreciate having you here.
Thank you for coming.
Just give them a moment to exit.
Get lined up together.
Thanks again. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. That's great.
Good night, thank you.
Good night. All righty. The next item of business for us this evening is our consent agenda items. We have 6 total items to approve this evening. The first item being the approval of minutes from March 13th. That was our last regular session. And I believe, Mr. Ragsdale, you have some suggested edits. Would you like to share those?
Offer some amendments to the minutes before we approve them. The first is on the second page of the minutes, under the items for approval. Under D, near the bottom of the page, for the motion, there's a reference to the motion seconded by Mrs. Ragsdale, and can make that correction. There's a similar one. Mrs. Burns, did you see that, where that?
He takes
Item D under-
issue with the pronoun.
I just want to make sure that she
D?
sees where it is for the official.
Yeah, I don't think Mrs. Ragsdale was here that evening.
Oh, forgive me.
I didn't see her.
Sorry, thank you.
And on the second to last page, under the strategic planning group update, the first sentence has another, there's Mrs. Bryson and Mrs. Ragsdale.
Someone's got enough for you, Dave.
And then, just while we're in here, on the third page, under the student representative report, third page of the minutes, the second bullet, near the end of the second bullet, has a reference that sophomores have English and MCAS coming up this month, and what Allison has said was English MCAS, which they actually had yesterday and today.
They did. They did. Okay. So our,
With those amendments, I would move to approve the minutes.
okay, fabulous. Thank you for sharing those. Any others that we didn't catch?
I'm willing to accept that page 3. The other 2, I think we should leave.
All right. So an option this evening for us to truly consider is that we table these minutes for this evening, the approval of. We can ask Tristan upon her return to amend those for us and put those forth to us for consideration again on April 10th. Mrs. Burns, Mr.
I would like to offer a motion to accept the minutes with the amendments.
Okay, that's fine too.
You know, just as long as they get corrected, I'd be willing to, if the board agrees, to accept the minutes with the amendments stated by Mr. Ragsdale.
Okay, so offer a motion to accept as amended, seconded by
I'll second
Mr.
those.
Ragsdale. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? That would be unanimous. Thank you, Kim. Okay, and then we have a couple of donations. The first one being the approval of the Wilmington Educational Foundation grant in honor of Joanne Benton. This is the Educators Exploration Grants in the total amount of $3,000. And I do believe that we have some information in our packet here. Dr. Brand, would you like to add anything?
Just to say that this has been one of the wonderful programs that I've come to learn about here in Wilmington, and the support of educators really trying to get it into the world and bring back to their respective classrooms and programs what they have learned in the travel. And so you do have in the packet here a proposal for a trip to Italy for Italian exploratory world language classes at the Wilmington Middle School in the amount of $1,500. And that's Katya Stefano and Neil Roberts for his request to travel to Hawaii to specifically study contemporary and Polynesian art, also in the amount of $1,500.
Great. Both very generous donations from WEF. Would anybody like to offer a motion to approve? Mr. Talbot, thank you. Second, and Mr. Bjork, I saw your hand. Any discussion? No? All those in favor? Great. Thank you. The next item is a donation of 2 is it Gene Amp PCR systems by the Boston Crime Lab to Wilmington High School Science Department in the total amount of $4,000. And again, there are some documents related to this donation in our packet, but Dr. Brand, would you like to share anything?
Again, thank you to the generous support of those who help make our programs and such towards improvement and innovation. This is a very generous grant, obviously, and one of the terrific programs and one of the terrific teachers of many that I've come to learn about here in the Wilmington High School, Dawn Martell, for her work. I can also say that I had the pleasure to participate in one of her crime lab-related activities. Not with the 2 Gene Amp PCR system, but it was nevertheless a great opportunity earlier in the year. And so looking for your support of acceptance for this.
That's great. And I see noted that it's several classes here that this could be used in, the biotech, forensic, and AP biology labs.
Yes.
Great. Would someone like to offer a motion to approve? Mrs. Burns, seconded by Mr. Bjork. All those in favor? That looks like unanimous. Kim, thank you. Moving on to the warrants. We've got G424, R232, R233, the local 71, 72. I'll take those for a motion, please. Mrs. Burns, thank you. Second, and Mr. Bjork. All those in favor? That looks like unanimous. We have a payroll warrant for March 27th, 2019. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve? Mr. Bjork, thank you. Mrs. Newhouse, seconded. Thank you. All those in favor of approving the payroll? Sure. Teachers thank us as well. We have a circuit breaker warrant this evening, CB19. Can I have a motion to approve, please? Mr. Talbot, thank you. Seconded by Mrs. Newhouse, thank you. All those in favor? We've got a couple of abstentions, Mrs. Burns and Mr. Bjork. I don't want to make that mistake. And then lastly, we've got a couple of SPED warrants. We have SPED 37 and SPED 38. Motion to approve, please. Mr. Ragsdale, seconded by Mrs. Bryson. All those in favor? Great, and we've got 3 abstentions. Thank you. Mrs. Burns, Mr. Bjork, and Mrs. Newhouse. Great. So concludes our consent agenda items for this evening. Next up on the agenda is our superintendent's report. Dr. Brand.
Thank you very much, and again, good evening, everyone. There are 2 items listed under Section 5, Superintendent's Report. I actually have 4 to share this evening, though, 4 items. In the packet, for members of the community, and certainly the committee, you'll note there's a copy of the actual release, the press release, if you will, that includes the announcement of the new middle school principal here in Wilmington, Alexander Phillips. I've spoken about this before, but I wanted to, the timing of the last packet didn't quite coincide with the inclusion of this announcement in here, but for members of the community specifically, I thought that I would include that in here. Talks have begun in terms of trying to support the transition of Mr. Phillips here to the district and, of course, to the middle school, and those I know will happen and start to happen very, very quickly. The Woburn Street School Principal Search, I'll bring your attention to that, as well as members of the community. In the packet, there's a memo that provides a little bit of information specific to this search. This has actually been a very active week, including today, where my colleagues around the table here, Dr. Regan and Mr. Ruggiero, as well as other members of the central office team, Ms. Raffi spent a good portion of the afternoon, late morning and afternoon at Woburn Street, where we hosted 2 of the 3 candidates. I just want to point out a couple of things in the memo. My apologies, there's 2 changes in terms of members of the search committee. Ms. Lisa Murphy should have been included there, and Ms. Kim Martiniello, I hope I said that right, originally I think was to serve, but ended up not doing so. This afternoon, at between 4:15 and 5:45, we did offer community forums for any members of the community to attend and to meet the candidates. We had approximately 10 people, thereabouts. I think around half were staff and parents, sort of dual role, and 5 members from the community. I will say that WCTV, again, thanks to their great partnership, recorded the forums. We will do what we did for the middle school search, and that is share out the link to WCTV, where they're going to post those interviews, and also provide a link, probably tomorrow, for members of the community to provide feedback, an electronic survey. The 3 finalists again, finally, on the second page, include Ms. Lori Fahey, who currently is serving as a principal in Dracut at the Anglesby Elementary School. Ms. Charlotte King, a name familiar, I know, certainly to many here, who currently is the director at the Wildwood Early Childhood Center here in Wilmington. And finally, Ms. Suzanne Sullivan, who currently is the principal at the Parker Elementary School in Billerica. So the process continues, and it would be my hope that if all goes well, we'll be at a point of making an announcement towards the end of next week at the latest. So certainly keep the community abreast of that. Two other items that are not in here. There's some activity that's taking place that I just wanted to share with the committee, and that's an effort by Ms. Julie Kim and Jay Demos through support of the Cummings Grant. I will get you more information on this, to build a pergola in the courtyard. DPW or facilities has been involved. Mr. Ruggiero, I know, has been involved too, and I just wanted to share that with you as an effort to beautify, or the beautification of the courtyard. And finally, the technology search, the director of technology, that posting is out. You saw that in your packet previously. I'm happy to say we've gotten a good number of applicants, I believe in the area of 30 or so, and we're pleased with at least what we see in terms of the depth of the candidates. We will move forward with that search starting next week, and I'll provide more information to you as well as we move through that. And that's it for me tonight.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Brandt. Any comments or questions from the committee? Okay. I think we can move right along this evening. Under new business, our first item is the school choice vote, and this is something that we do on an annual basis. There is some information provided to us, but Dr. Brand, do you want to take us through it?
I will. Thank you. There is a memo in the packet, 7A school choice vote. This is an annual vote that school committees are, is at least my understanding of the law in Massachusetts, obligated to take. And certainly Wilmington is no different. I try to provide a little bit of background information, really through the lens of the community member who might be turning into this item and not exactly clear on what exactly school choice vote is, and so I provide a little bit more background information and context. This is a topic that sometimes receives some conversation with school committees, from my experience throughout through different districts. And there may be different reasons for a school committee, respectively, to consider whether or not to entertain a vote to open up school choice. And quite simply, school choice is the allowance of students residing in another district to enter, in this case, the Wilmington Public Schools. And so, again, so a little bit more information here. My recommendation to you at this time would be to stay consistent with recent positions that you as a school committee have taken around this vote, and I try to highlight really what I see as the salient reasons for that recommendation in the last full paragraph. It seems to me clear that we're at a point of some degree of uncertainty, specifically as it relates to space throughout the district, and that I would suggest might be K through 12. As I've come to learn, we don't have a lot of space, really we don't, across the district. You know well, we've talked about this here, some degree of question around the student retention rate of students going from 8th to 9th grade. We, in the last 2 years, have been at 68%, I think is the number. If that were to change favorably, hopefully it may, then certainly we would have to be careful and cognizant of what that would look like here. So I'm happy to take any questions, but ultimately this is an action item seeking your vote. And the motion you can see at the bottom of the page, but again, happy to take any questions should you have any.
Any questions or comments from the committee? Mrs. Bryson.
Thank you for providing all of this information and for your suggestion and the recommendation. I think that it makes a lot of good sense. There's just one thing I would love to talk about in the future. I know for right now there is a level of uncertainty, but this idea of the retention at 68% is quite low, so we might have some extra seats in some spots at the high school at some point where other students would be able to benefit from our resources. And so I know at this point it probably doesn't make good sense, but moving forward, I think if we were to see the same retention and for us not to open our doors to others, I think that's something we should definitely talk about as a committee.
Mr. Ragsdale, I saw your hand first, and then I'll get to you, Mrs.
I'd just like to add also for a little bit of context here that for students that are accepted through school choice, that the sending district pays essentially a tuition payment to the receiving district for the marginal cost of educating that student. And so it's generally done when it's considered in the financial interest of the receiving district that they have those spaces available and therefore can receive that tuition. We've mentioned several times that we have some declining enrollment over the past couple of years, which might make sense at some point to consider this or possibly accept it. But I think that I take Dr. Brand's point about the uncertainty and especially around building configuration and when we're still in discussions about how we might reconfigure the schools and consolidate and so forth, that it's I think I would recommend certainly taking his advice on this vote and making that decision for this year.
Mrs. Burns.
I concur with both board members. I think with the uncertainty between the reconfiguration, which is a great point that you bring up, I think the impact to what the municipality is facing with 40B housing and that discussion that's happening at that level is going to drive, I think, how we look at this each year. And whether we do it as a district or if we do it impartial. I know some districts have school choice up to a certain grade level, but they don't have it for, like, let's say their high school. I'm thinking of Newburyport as an example. I'm open to that school choice possibility, but I also want to be careful that our classroom sizes don't get too large. I think I think now most classrooms, especially at the high school level, are anywhere from approximately 18 to 22 or something, and I think that's a healthy, viable number for learning. I just want to make sure that when we sign on for this, that we don't tip the scales. That it creates a little bit more of a struggle to educate all students. So.
Fair enough. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, I think I'm hearing. Mostly we're saying the same thing. So the recommended motion before us is to move that the Wilmington School Committee vote to not participate in the state school choice program because of lack of available space to accommodate out-of-town students. Would somebody like to offer that as a motion? Mrs. Burns, thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Ragsdale, thank you. All those in favor? That would be unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item listed under new business this evening is the fiscal year 19 financial report.
If I may.
Yes, please.
Ask Mr. Ruggiero to speak to actually item 7B and 7C following the personnel report.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. In front of you, you have the FY19 financial report as of March 20th. As you can see, our total appropriation, $40,326,533. Through March 20th, we've expended $24,478,302 in encumbered funds, both payroll and non-payroll related items of $15,277,711, leaving us a balance in the black as of March 20th of $570,521. Some of that will be eaten up as we go through the rest of the school year, but I'm very confident that we'll end the school year once again in the black.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Ruggiero? Okay. Personnel report.
Thank you. In front of you, you have a personnel report. I think the last one was probably December, early January, so this is just some activity that's occurred since then. You will note that there are, I think, 5 open positions right now. One of those open positions has been filled. That would be the educational assistant at the Shawsheen, the second line item. Yeah, that position has been filled. The other 4 Really, one is being filled for the rest of this year with a long-term substitute for various reasons, and the other three are really very current resignations. One as current as, I think, today or yesterday. We had notification, but last day was, I think, yesterday. So we're working on filling those. So right now we're using substitutes to fill those positions. So.
Great. Any comments or questions on the personnel report? Mr. Ragsdale?
One thing I noticed looking through this, this particular report is that there's a lot of both movement, but then also resignations from educational assistants. That seems to be the bulk of the people here. And I was wondering if there is a sense of why, is that just sort of how it shook out this time, or is there anything to read into that we have so many ed assistants who are moving around or resigning?
Yeah, we had one movement in here. We had an educational assistant who retired in February. So an educational assistant was moved from one program to cover that retired educational assistant's position, if you will, so that opened up that other position. And then some of the resignations, it kind of happens throughout the course of the year. It is a somewhat of a, sometimes a difficult position. There's a lot expected of them, and sometimes they, it's not for them, or another opportunity in some other field or someplace else comes to play, and they decide to move on. So.
Okay, and just kind of coming off that, more broadly, I remember that at the beginning of the year, we still had some open positions that, from some late resignations, and in the financial report that we just looked at, the long-term subbing account was one of the ones that had the deficit more than $1,000. I was wondering if just in general you can comment on how much we've had to rely on substitutes this year versus higher full-time staff.
We rely on substitutes quite a bit. We actually, like almost every district in the state, have difficulty with the fill rate. As the economy gets better, the pool of substitutes shrink. When you see that long-term substitute line, it's offset many times in a line item in one of the school budgets. So if a teacher's on maternity leave, as an example, we may charge the long-term sub salary to a long-term sub line item, but the teacher, once they're out of their sick days, that their salary, which is encumbered, we unencumber it because they no longer if they take the rest of the school year off or are out longer than their FMLA leave. So it's offset in other line items that'll be under budget, but we try to charge the long-term subs to one kind of line item, which is what you see there as the overage, but it's kind of offset in other places.
And I'm not so much concerned about the financial impact as just wanting to get more of an overall sense of, to what extent, and like you said, that a lot of other districts have the same situation, but trying to have a sense of, how much we're able to rely, to have full-time staff, covering these positions versus relying on substitutes.
It's always difficult to project maternity leaves and what may happen during the course of the year. Some year we have more than others, which impacts that as well. But
if I may add, and I don't know, Mr. Ruggiero would certainly know better if this was an anomaly year where we had some professional staff who left, you may recall, early on in the year with, quite frankly, very little notice. And again, I don't know if this was just an unusual set of circumstances this year. That's concerning, of course, and I think something to watch, as we go forward. That's point number one, and I guess point number two, one of the things that I intend to have conversations with the principals is to make sure that once we solidify the known staffing needs for next year, that there is a sense of urgency to get our respective postings out there in the spring, coming soon, to get the best possible candidates we can, and to get things wrapped up as quickly as we can so that we can start fully staffed in September.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments on the personnel report? All right, moving right along. Next item of business this evening is an overview of our proposed Wildcat Summer Sports Clinics. It's amazing that we're already talking about the summer camps.
So in the packet, there is some information from Mr. Alpertz, our Director of Athletics, Physical Education and Health, and he provides an overview of the intention, or the plan, if you will, around the clinics going into, as I understand it, the 11th year. This is a, no pun intended, a wildly successful program, as I've come to learn. The level of participation, it seems, that this program has providing rather, an opportunity for our students to get involved sounds really, truly quite something. Again, similar to the CARES program, I would suggest a reasonably priced option for students. And so this is just to provide an overview for you. It's not seeking any action or vote, but rather more informational. And I think it'll be very soon that this information would start to roll out to the community.
Any questions or comments, Mrs. Burns?
I just had a question with regards to multiple siblings attending the same camp. I see that it's $175 each for each child. Has there ever been a situation where the department considered a reduced rate for, let's say, the third sibling, if they all fall within a age bracket or grade bracket for the one clinic, or is it just a straight 175 for each?
I think it's 175 for each, and then it's 150 for every clinic after that.
For the one clinic, right?
For one clinic, yeah,
Okay.
it'll be the 175.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, each clinic runs approximately 28 to 30 hours a week. It's really a good
I'm just saying
deal,
for
if you will.
those
But, yeah,
families that may
we
have.
work with families if they have a hardship or
Okay.
whatever. It's not going to really turn a family away. But I think it's just, it's been wild. I think we had over 500 kids participated last year. You know, maybe not 500 different kids, but in total through the camps, 500, which is pretty good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot that goes into it, so I just,
Mr. Talbot?
I know personally that signing up for other types of camps is a lot more expensive. I mean, a lot more expensive.
Yeah, a lot more.
So for $150, $175, that's really a great deal. And it's definitely a star for the town of Wilmington to have programs like this for our children. Yeah.
Alrighty, any other questions or comments on the athletic camps? Happy to see those as always, so I'm glad that we can continue to offer those.
If I could, just one.
Yes, please.
Sorry, the camps will be at the middle school this summer, as we had mentioned, and hopefully next year we'll be back to the high school. That's the goal.
Great. Parents, please make note. Don't come here thinking that this is where it is. Okay. Next item is the SEAM Collaborative Amended Collaborative Agreement.
Thank you. You have in your packet a cover memo that provides an outline. This is an action item seeking your vote of approval. SEAM, and I will admit, I didn't do my due diligence at the very beginning of the year to explore what that actually meant, and it wasn't actually so easy to find, but I will tell you, I'm looking at my text because this is where I got my information from Ms. Dixie a couple of weeks ago. Special Education Educators Mutual. I can see why they might have stuck with SEAM. But it is, as I've come to learn, it is a wonderful group. It is the collaborative, as you know, or I hope you know, that we are a member of, and it provides a wide array of services for member districts, as well as sometimes non-member districts. This item is here before your consideration tonight because of the vote by the board, of which I, as a superintendent, and other superintendents are a member of, to add North Andover as a member. And because of that, primarily, it's here as it is before all of the member districts for school committee vote of approval. You have attached to this memo the articles of agreement in there. There's also a secondary change in the governance section you will note on that memo around Desi's role on the board from appointed representative to liaison. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. I can tell you as a board member that I had the opportunity to, at the beginning of this year is when this conversation really started, and I can say it certainly was a very thoughtful conversation, trying to weigh the benefits around adding in another member district. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Mr. Ragsdale.
I was wondering if you can speak to what the general trade-offs are for adding a number member. I mean, it's the ones that seem to come right to mind are spreading resources more thinly, at least before potentially more staff can be added, but giving greater financial resources from their contribution.
I guess I would, it's a very fair question. I think that I guess I would say that the calculus sort of used, not in the literal sense, but how much additional possible expenditure might come from a respective district and their needs. There's a cost advantage for higher needs students that are a member of, for the district who's a member of this collaborative, and it's trying to be, I would suggest, be mindful of what any increased cost might be. Costs that would also include, for example, busing. So proximity for the respective district to where they're geographically located and what that transportation would entail, or would include rather. So, I mean, it's a brief answer, but that's sort of the bigger picture in terms of trying to weigh that. And the transportation piece, I will tell you, there were a couple of districts that were vying to get in to the collaborative. And it was felt like, as a starting point, the transportation alone could be quite costly for the district, for the respective districts. So, I'm still learning for sure about the collaborative, but there was careful consideration of some of those factors plus others. So.
Any other questions or comments? No? Okay, so the recommended motion before us this evening is to move to approve the SEAM Collaborative amended collaborative agreement. Would somebody like to offer that as a motion? Mrs. Newhouse, I saw your hand up. Mrs. Burns as the second. All those in favor? That looks like unanimous to me.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Our next item under new business this evening is to start the discussion about school start times.
Thank you. In this week's packet, item 7F is a school start time study, the memo entitled that. This is for certain one of those. I've talked a little bit about this here around the table previously rather. Certainly one of the areas that I've come to learn. I commented on it in my superintendent's report, you might recall, but certainly one of those prominent areas in the district that certainly drew a lot of attention and a lot of interest. And so what you have here tonight are a couple of different documents. First off, a memo that provides, which I'll speak to in just a second, some of the recommendations that I would propose for consideration. But also going back a little bit in time, a memo back from March 2016 by then Superintendent of Schools Mary DeLye, who had a memo entitled Joint Statement on Later Start Time for High Schools. Some of you around the table who were a part of this committee, this may, I think, would look familiar. There was some degree of collaborative effort with many of the districts, actually I think all in the Middlesex League, and you have a copy of that memo there. And I certainly remember this was quite a news item back at the time, even if you weren't in this general area, that drew interest by the commitment by the school districts within the Middlesex League to put some stakes in the ground around changing start times. And again, when I use that term, it's largely in reference to moving ahead the start times for the secondary schools, middle and high school. So the memo outlines, or provides rather, just again a recap of what I already mentioned, that this is an item that is on a lot of people's minds. I provide just a brief snapshot of some of the other Middlesex League schools and the efforts to change their start times. I don't know all of the start times for all of the districts, but I can tell you that many have made the changes, and this is just a highlight, not all, but many. And I think what I will find is that those that haven't have been talking about it or might be gearing up to talk about it, and certainly more information, in fact, finding to come. But a snapshot of some of the other districts. And in here as well is the proposal and a timeline that I would suggest that I see that would be associated with this work. You may recall, I may have spoken about this before, I actually have a fair degree of experience leading a committee in my previous district through a year-long effort here. And so it's with that privilege that I had that provides a little more insight, I would suggest to you, in terms of knowing that this is a large endeavor, a large undertaking. And once you start to get into the considerations that are associated with it, it's complex, and there's lots to do. And so the timeline that I propose to you here is, first off, let there be no question, I believe that I need to pick up the ball or press play again, whatever metaphor you might want to use, on our district's effort to explore a change of our start times. Our start times are quite early, especially at the middle school here. So the proposal here is to begin this work in September of 2019, so the beginning of next school year, and really bring together a committee that will represent all of the key stakeholders. This is a body of work that would not just involve staff, but certainly the wider community, and really take the better part of next year pulling together information on a number of disparate areas related to this, the possible change of start times. You can see the map of the other components of the timeline presenting back to the school committee, if all goes well, in the latter part of next year. Believe it or not, that would be May or June of 2020. And then having the opportunity for this committee and the community to reflect upon the proposals, consider them, consider any financial costs that could be associated with such a change, and then looking ahead to the fall of 2020. I know it's hard to keep straight, but sometime out there, if there were to be any budgetary impact, consideration would need to be given to incorporating that into the budget plan for fiscal year 22. Thank you. So this is meant to be informational, not seeking approval, but just to give you a general sense of where I envision this to go. Love to have your feedback. This is meant to be not the only conversation here about this, but that I know that we need to get started on this work. I don't feel like there's the capacity to do so in the next couple of months, and that's why the proposal ultimately is to try and think about kicking this off in the fall. So with all of that said, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Bjork.
Obviously, the logistics, transportation logistics are going to be a lot of heavy lifting.
Indeed.
What are some of the other challenging aspects that the committee will have to consider?
Well, not necessarily in any particular order, but what I came to realize is there's a real educational component. Because not necessarily, from some experience and some reading that I've done, and also watching some other districts not too far from here, come to mind is not everybody necessarily immediately gets on board with an understanding of why it's even important to have this conversation. After all, haven't we just started school sort of the same time for decades? What's the problem? So starting with an understanding, and there is absolutely research out there that speaks to the start time and the impact on the health and well-being of young adolescents. So I would say that's one piece. I would say a secondary piece is then contingent for each district, of course. What are the trade-offs in order to getting to a point where there is a realization that we should be altering the start times for middle and high school? What are the other trade-offs for the start times of the other schools? And usually the default is if somebody's going to go later, somebody has to start earlier. And not always, but generally it's a flip-flop, and now you're talking about elementary kids potentially starting earlier. And so then that gets into a whole conversation with the community, say, well, wait a minute. So we're going to have younger kids on the corner at 6:45 in the morning in the dark. So that's a secondary piece. And then thirdly, what's it going to cost, and what's the investment? My understanding is generally, not necessarily always, but generally or frequently, there may be additional buses that might be needed. I can't tell you if that's the case here. There's a lot of logistics to explore, but how much then is it worth, if that's true, for communities to say, no, this is a change we need to pursue, even if it's going to cost X more dollars. So, so the work is, there's logistical and organizational, but then it really becomes, I think, a campaign to educate and seek buy-in amongst members of the community. Could be contractual issues too, sometimes.
I was going to ask if that was
Yeah.
a factor.
Could be.
I would also say, as far as flip-flopping, at least in my experience, all of my kids, when they were younger, were up at 5 a.m. anyway, whereas my teenager wants to sleep in all day.
Childcare, the intersection with athletics after school, although I'm curious to what that looks like right now, quite frankly, for us, when you do take a look at some of the other start times of the other high schools. Again, I haven't dug into this, but, so those are some of the things.
Mrs. Burns.
I think you touched upon a lot of the questions, preliminary questions I had, some of which I anticipate being answered once this committee gets rolling. Some of the questions is the CARES piece, before and after school programming. What's that impact going to look like? Extended hours, or I'm not sure if there's any need, especially after school with parents working. If there's, I think that's where my curiosity is with the need for possible extra staff in just the operation of that program. You touched upon the expenditure of buses and transportation. I guess one of my concerns is that last year's contract, we contracted for a 5-year at a savings to the district. So with something like this, does that contract kind of go out? We have to renegotiate it all over again because you don't know if you're bringing buses. Is it, are we looking at, which is something I think parents need to kind of be aware of, are we looking at possibly busing fees that we'd have to consider along with this? The other is, with regards to the non-participating districts that have signed on but have yet to implement the schedule change, I'd be interested in where, and I'm sure this committee will find out where they currently sit within their districts as it pertains to this and how it impacts, I'm curious to find out how it impacts currently the athletic games and how the scheduling is for those districts who have made the change, playing against districts who have not. So I don't know if that's even, if that's even a big issue, but those are some questions that I'd be interested in learning more about.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Mr. Ragsdale.
I think that the timeline here looks realistic, and it's, I think, speaks to the magnitude of the task of doing something like this. That we're here in the spring of the 2018-19 school year talking about a change that wouldn't be enacted until the 21-22 school year, which is kind of hard to get your head around. But I think that the experience of other districts, and this is something that over in November at the MASC conference, that this was a session that I went to about changing school start times, and that seemed to be, this seems to be in sequence, that seems to be consistent with what the districts and superintendents that were presenting there, talked about as far as how much time you need to really work it from the beginning to the end, because there are so many pieces of the puzzle here that you have a lot of complexity. I think that Dr. Burns' point about buy-in is also really, really important, because it's very easy to see the disruption that when you have to rejigger your school drop-off and your work schedule and your child care and suddenly traffic, it's like, oh, we moved the school start times ahead and now there's increased traffic at certain hours in the town. That it's really easy to see the disruption, and it's harder to see the costs that we're paying now. But the research really just is very, very clear. I mean, they keep researching it, and no one is finding contrary information. That over and over again, they're finding that the secondary, age students really are, having, the sleep deficits that they're getting is really, having effects on them. And so those, it's easy to say that the cost of more buses, that's a tangible cost that eventually we'll have to, look at financially. But there are costs being borne now that are not as visible, but are still very, very real, and that's why I think this is an important goal to pursue. I did have a question about the timeline at one part. So in the third bullet of the timeline, you're looking at the report recommendations to the school committee at the end of next year in May or June of 2020. And then there's kind of a large gap there until we actually get to a potential vote in late fall 2020. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what kind of work you envision happening between those 2 points.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, first off, of course, we've got a little bit of a summer gap, and that's always provides a little bit of a pause to some degree. But what I would envision here is the work of the committee coming to a place where there might be options that could be presented, and any associated costs. And a one-off report to this body is one thing. But then really socializing it and really taking the time to have either members of the administration, perhaps members of the committee, either this committee or the working committee, take some time to develop a really targeted outreach that perhaps starts before the end of next school year, but certainly would have to continue into the fall, of 2020. And I think really getting a sense of where are people at in the community? Are people on board? Is there strong pushback? And I would suggest that time frame would be really helpful for you as a governing body to gauge that, and certainly to gauge that around the implications for families and if there's a financial impact and what that might be. So I think that time is going to be important to consider. And again, the gap at the summer is always, it's not ideal. But.
Any other questions or comments? I was just going to share that MASC is actually sponsoring a workshop on school start times. It's this coming Saturday. It would be timely if you're interested in learning more. It's out at the Marriott in Marlborough. And if you're interested in attending, I would just reach out to MASC and register through them. The other thing I want to just impress upon the community and the members, this timeline that you're proposing is very helpful. I think we're all aware that this is not a simple flipping the switch. I've said that multiple times each time that we've brought this up. There's a lot of work, there's a lot of consideration. I don't think we can make assumptions. That's not fair to our kids. So I think it's important to do the work as prescribed. Let's take our time. Let's do it the right way. And I say that as a kid. My kid's going to be gone. My kid's going to be going into those 8 o'clock, 8:30 classes as a freshman. So I have no personal stake in it, although my goal is always do what's right for the kids.
If I just maybe one final point, one thing that I do think is going to have to be, not meant to get into this right now at all, is your current policy around transportation.
Yeah.
Mr. Ruggiero can correct me, but I think I've asked him enough times, and I'm pretty confident to say that currently in our district, it's a wonderful thing to be in a place, as I've come to learn, where we're providing transportation to most students. Not all, but I think the vast majority. Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, we're with that approach, we're currently not following the school committee's policy on bus transportation. Said another way, you have in your policy certain distances upon or from which, from a school, a student can be transported. And as I've come to learn, we are pretty generous, you're generous, in the provision of transportation. And so I think that that's going to be obviously a very important conversation as some starting point. Not this evening, not at the next meeting, but certainly I would say in the initial phases of this work.
Maybe we can add the walking school bus into that policy.
Thank you.
Great. All right. I think that covers all the items we have tonight under new business. Any public comment, please? If you could just state your name, that's fine. Just state your name and your address for the record, please.
Okay. Jay Samaha, 30 Arlene Ave. I just wanted to, hopefully the committee, just thinking about school start times. You know, having taken a look at a lot of the research in it, it really is, it's a health thing for our students. I think that, you know, the Centers for Disease Control, the American Journal of Pediatrics, American Academy of Pediatrics, they're all supporting it. Like Mr. Ragsdale said, there's no research out there really that says that it's a bad thing. And I also wanted to say I appreciate Dr. Brand's. I work for the city of Boston, and Boston, I don't know if anybody's aware, Boston tried to just sort of ram in new start times, and it caused chaos. So I really appreciate this slow, I'll call it a slow approach to it, really considering all different aspects. So, you know, and I think we need to do a good job, the committee needs to do a good job of communicating to the community that this isn't just, you know, wake up, you know, lazy kids or anything like that. It's, you know, it's increased rates of depression and drinking, smoking, drug use, all sorts of things that we don't want for our kids. So that's it.
Great. Thank you for your input. Okay. Under other reports, we have a couple of subcommittee reports that we're expecting. The first one is a strategic plan update. Would anybody like to offer? Is that nice? That's you two. No, not necessarily. Anybody would like to comment on where we're at, the latest and greatest in the 2 weeks?
I don't think we have anything new to add since the last meeting.
Well, we met, I think we met actually on the 15th, so we had our last meeting.
Oh, that's right, we did.
We met on the 15th.
I forgot.
Okay.
I know, I'm trying, I was sitting, I saw it and I said, oh my goodness, do we have a meeting? So we did on the 15th, and we participated in objective writing. And so in my mind is only the objective that my group was working on, but when we walked in the room, and correct me if I'm wrong or chime in, but the room was broken up into different topics or the themes that have come up over the course of the year during doing this work. And so, for example, family community engagement was one that I was working on, and so there were about 5 of us, and we were just drafting what we thought might be an objective that's then going to go, or has already gone, and this is where you can, to the leadership committee.
Yes.
And they're going to then, I guess, wordsmith and, you know, decide whether or not that makes good sense, and then it'll come back to us at some point in May?
6th, early May, yes.
Early May, and then that'll be our last meeting.
Yes.
With the team. But, I mean, from my perspective, and I think Mr. Ritt's been very productive, we've done, I think, a lot of good work during that time. People have been very excited and committed and thinking about just this conversation about start times and the community buy-in. I do feel as there's a lot of just buy-in by the people who are present, and the team is large, and people are very committed and excited about this work. So I think it's been really wonderful, and Lori's been pretty incredible. So, Mr. Ragsdale, did you have anything?
I think I'll just describe maybe in just a little bit more detail. So in the second meeting, which we reported on at the last school committee meeting, that we had been looking for those common themes. So we were looking through the community feedback and the school feedback and trying to pull together those, you know, common themes. And having done that at this most recent meeting, there were essentially the tables were now split up by those themes. So, for example, facilities was a theme that came up like over and over again. So there was, you know, a table that was focusing on coming up with the actual initiatives and goals for doing work in facilities. And then there was one around curriculum and instruction, for example. And so the tables were split up at this point by those common themes, trying to now start to focus on the actual goals and strategic initiatives that are going to become part of the plan itself. And then 2 other things that happened, that there was some work on core values. So there's a table that was also working on core values, and then also a table looking at measurable outcomes. How are we going to try to measure the success of the plan that we come up with? So those were was the majority of the work that was done.
The materials, I think, were very well organized, and so we were given, for example, family community engagement. Any feedback that related to that was almost coded in a way, so we could go through and see the words that were coming up again and again, and say, oh, this is really important to our community. So it was a really, I think, very well done, and really, I think it is showing us what the community and the teacher, everyone is saying about our schools and really where they want to go. So I think everyone's voice is represented. You can see and how aligned we are in some of what we're hoping and expecting for the future of Wilmington Public Schools. It's very exciting to see the same things pop up again and again. So I'm pretty excited about what will happen in our next meeting and to see where this goes. So.
And in the prior meetings, Dr. Likas had assigned us to tables, so we're sort of each assigned different tables, but we're also working on very similar things. For this most recent meeting, everyone essentially chose your own table. So everyone was able to choose where they were most interested in contributing to the particular goals and initiatives based on those common themes. So the tables were reoriented in a very different way by people just using like where they were most passionate about contributing.
And I just have to applaud the high school students that have been participating and just the unbelievable insight they have, and they busy along drafting, and their words are very, I'm gonna be at our table, I think her sentence was our first sentence. I mean, just really proud of the work that they've done in this committee. So it's been pretty exciting, I think, for us to see and for us to actually listen to one another and not just try and share our ideas, but to hear. And I think having the high school students has been really helpful because it really presents a very different perspective than I think what all of us would be saying together. I think having a high school student say, well, actually, here's what I'm thinking. And we're like, oh, well, that's wow. I mean, so I think that's been a really great addition. So kudos to the team for thinking of inviting them.
So if I may, so we are on course. May 6th is the last meeting date for the planning team. And it would be with the intention to have a draft of this before you at your May 22nd meeting. For the first time to see that, feedback and thoughts, and then again, the commitment to have you approve the new strategic plan prior to the end of the school year. So stay tuned.
I just wanted to ask one question. Mr. Ragsdale, you mentioned facilities. Can you expand on what that discussion involved, specifically to school buildings?
Yeah, I mean, school buildings, both the general kind of state of school buildings as far as just their operational cleanliness and good working order, but also looking at how the buildings are used. So there's all, it's not just, I mean, obviously we all want to have clean buildings that are not falling apart, but there was getting into more detail about making sure that the buildings have instructional spaces that allow students to be pulled out into separate stations when needed, that we have the internal configuration of the buildings, not just the facilities themselves, are appropriate for the kind of learning that we want to engage in, and making sure that student needs and faculty needs are taken care of. I mean, it's also the big picture too, as far as making sure that we have the technology infrastructure. That's part of what people were also talking about as far as facilities, that was intertwined with technology, that was considered part of that same group. But then also just thinking about the long range. A lot of it we know intersects with the town master facilities plan.
Yes.
And so there's only so far we can go in our strategic plan outside of that. But
right, and I was going to ask or highlight that we consider the town plan. It seems to me that that's been kind of put on the back burner for now. But there are some buildings that we ought to be concerned about. In particular, Mrs. Bryson and I had the opportunity to tour the Wildwood School. You've been made aware that there has been some environmental testing done in that building. And although the levels have been reported as safe and appropriate, acceptable, I have some concerns about that building. So I think we just need to be aware. I think it's a bigger town issue that needs to be considered. I know there's a lot of talk about buildings in the community right now and purchases and properties, et cetera. But I, again, think about the kids, what's best for the kids, and that building concerns me.
Yeah, out of the 8 school buildings, that's clearly the one that has the biggest concerns. And I was in the group that read the Wildwood teachers' feedback looking for the common theme, so we...
that was pretty clear to me.
their opinions came through very clearly.
Yeah, so although my personal time on this board is short, I would hope that we consider to keep the status of our buildings in mind as a community, and that one might be the top priority at this point. Certainly recognizing that that's not a decision that this board can make by itself. Perhaps we need to involve the Board of Selectmen, perhaps the Finance Committee, and certainly would have to go through a town meeting process, but I'm just going to put that out there. So there we go. All right, any other comments or questions on the strategic plan? No, okay. The next item, I think this one's mine, superintendent evaluation update. That would be me. Alrighty, so we are getting close, folks, to the end of that process. And you all have been provided with an electronic version of our template that we are going to be using for our individual evaluations for Dr. Brand. You'll notice that the template you were provided with includes his goals and some wording along with that. A copy of this template has also been posted to the district website for the public to review so that they can see what we will be evaluating Dr. Brand on, along with the multiple discussions we've had publicly. So I also shared out a copy of a suggested rubric. You might find that helpful in your evaluation. It also might be helpful to take a look at samples from other districts and what they say. I shared out a particular link through, it was the Quincy School Department. Public information here, folks, so I'm not spreading any stories. And also, I found that Google is a really helpful tool. You'll be surprised what you find. So, a couple of items along the timeline. Our deadline, notice I say our deadline to complete our individual evaluations is April 8th, okay? Really appreciate getting those in to Tristan. We're gonna ask Tristan to receive those for us April 8th. That's coming up quick. Absolute deadline is the 10th of April. Please don't make us chase everybody. We don't have time. The subcommittee, comprising of myself, Mrs. Bryson, and Mrs. Newhouse, will be meeting on April 11th to put those 7 evaluations into one. At the time that we have a final draft, it will also be posted to the district website. So at the same time as our meeting packet, it's going up. It seems like it's a little bit awkward in that it's an evaluation, but that's the way this process works, right? It's a public process. So kind of guessing that that would probably be available on the district website April 18th, 19th, something like that, with the actual evaluation being delivered on the 24th. Okay. Any questions on that? It still looks a little bit overwhelming probably, but I think once you get into it, it'll go pretty quickly for you, okay? Please take some care with your comments. They're just as important as the actual ratings. Okay? All right. So now we're up to correspondence.
I've not received any this evening.
Okay. I have some fun ones that I wanted to share, and although they weren't directed specifically to the school committee, as a school committee member, I was invited into the West School to participate in their Read Across America event recently. And I spent some time with Mrs. Yelnack's class in room 203, and I got some lovely cards as a thank you. It really, really sweet. I pass them around. I know that they won't be able to pick these up on the camera, but this is why we do this work, right? So all the frustrating things that sometimes come across, these cards make it worth it. So I say thank you to my friends in Mrs. Yelnack's class. I'll say a special shout out to Mackenzie, that was my escort, and I hope you enjoyed the pencils. The other thing that I wanted to share, and again, this didn't come specifically to the school committee, but I don't know if everybody realizes this, but we have a gem in our high school principal, Miss Peters. She takes the time to recognize individual students with personal notes. I don't know if they can see this. And I'm just going to read one line that or 2 lines that I think are quite special. I am very proud of you and truly honored to be your principal. Thank you for all that you do and for all that you are. How many principals do that? Probably not many. So I just wanted to share that with the committee because I thought that was extra special. And with that, I think we have some upcoming meetings. We talked about the 10th. We talked about the 24th of April. In our agenda are also a great list of dates. Can anybody think of any others that weren't included that we ought to share out? Dr. Brand?
The Behavioral Health Fair, a reminder to
Yes.
everybody, is tomorrow evening between 5 and 8 o'clock here at the high school.
Great. Awesome. Okay. And with that, I think we have one last item, and that is a motion to adjourn. Would somebody like to offer that up? Mrs. Bryson, seconded by Mr. Talbot. All those in favor? That looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much for your time and attention this evening.